Philly Startup Leaders presents Founder Factory 2015. This program was recorded January 13th, 2015 at The Hub at Cirrus Center in Philadelphia. This year's Founder Factory is brought to you by these sponsors: Broadpath, the Innovation Center at 3401, Startup PHL, and Morgan Lewis. In video number 2, a conversation with Gabriel Weinberg, the founder and CEO of DuckDuckGo.
Our next speaker, I'm looking at him, is the founder and CEO of DuckDuckGo, Mr. Gabriel Weinberg. Come on up, Gabe. Are you comfortable now?
Kind of.
Okay. Other than me making you feel uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Cool. So, So I thought we'd get started. So Gabe is the one of two authors of the Traction book. Many of you got the Traction book. The first 100 tickets to today's show included a copy of the book. We do have extras. We are selling them back there. You can get them during the breaks. It is an awesome book. Highly recommended reading. Very obviously pertinent to today's event. So Gabe was kind enough to come and chat with us about various things about the book and what inspired him to write it. And before we get into all that, can you tell us about Gabe, the man himself? What were you doing before DuckDuckGo? Well, professionally, not when you were like a child. So like professionally, what were you doing before DuckDuckGo? What projects did you work on before you started DuckDuckGo? And then we'll get into what you're doing now.
All right, brief history. I grew up in Atlanta, went to school in Boston and MIT. Right out of school, started doing startups. That was 2000. Started a company right out of school that went absolutely nowhere. Tried to sell that company, that went nowhere. Got hired by a firm doing the same exact kind of thing. It's one of the people I tried to sell it to. Did that for a year, thanks. Then decided I wanted to do startups again, but I didn't have any money, so I did consulting for 4 hours a day and limited that, and did startups the rest of the day. Met a partner, hit up an idea that kind of took off, ran that for 3 years, sold it 2006, moved here to Philly, didn't know anyone, did a whole nother round of side project ideas, hit up on DuckDuckGo, been working on that for the last 8 years. I think, something like that.
Sounds right to me.
Yeah.
What inspired you? What was the the inception point, the flux capacitor moment, whatever, where you were like, I'm gonna do DuckDuckGo?
It is one of my favorite movies.
Me too.
I moved here. I literally knew no one. My wife got a job at GSK, was going there every day. So I just started doing all sorts of random side projects. I had maybe like 10 going or something like that. 3 of them were kind of search structured data related. And I was like, they all 3 of them were kind of going nowhere. But I realized after about 6 months that if I put them together, they might be something interesting. And so decided I would just try to launch something. That took another 6 months, and then put that out there. But while I was doing that, I was still in the middle of like these other 4 projects. And I think over time, it was just, I was most interested in that. There was a user base that was very tiny, but still interested. And I just kind of kept going. It wasn't business related at all. There was no business in there.
And what? For those who don't know, DuckDuckGo is the search engine that doesn't track you. Is that a thing for you too? I mean, are you personally convicted on privacy, or is it? Or maybe it's both, or is it also that you're sort of observing what these big search engine players were doing and thinking, well, obviously there's more people who feel that way. How did you kind of get down that path? And we'll talk about how that's impacted your business, but.
So it was a completely personal decision. At the time, privacy was not that big a deal. It certainly wasn't a big useful thing for business. I have a technology and policy graduate degree, so I've always been kind of interested in that area. What happened is I launched this thing in Reddit, Hacker News, and I started immediately getting questions about search privacy, like what do you store for your logs, that kind of stuff. Hadn't really thought about it at all, just had the default configuration on, this is a side project, so I do the absolute minimum necessary. And did an investigation myself and saw that the normal stuff that I often say is like the most personal stuff on the internet, because you just type in your financial health problems to your search engine without thinking about it. But really that information is stored. It can be requested by law enforcement. It is given to marketers, all these different things. So at the same time, there was all this information being handed over by subpoena. And there was like a Chinese dissident case for Yahoo, like in 2006, I think. And I am kind of anti-establishment, if you will. I didn't want anything to do with handing information over to governments. And it doesn't impact the business model of the search engines, because it's you make most of the money just based on the keyword you type in. You type in car, you get a car ad. So I figured it's kind of the best of both worlds. You can not track people. It's something the big companies can't copy. It doesn't impact your ability to make money. And it was personally interesting to me. So it was like kind of a no-brainer.
So all of the terrible things I'm searching for, if I'm searching for them on your search engine and law enforcement busts down your door, you're like, I don't know what to tell you. There's nothing here.
Yeah, we have absolutely no data to track it back to you.
Yeah, cool. In 2011, you did a $3 million A round?
Sure, call it that.
Sure, why not? From Union Square Ventures, which is one of the more admired venture capital firms based out of New York. Definitely big fan of Fred Wilson's got a blog called AVC. Definitely one of my daily reading list things. So congrats to that. What would you share with us on the fundraising process? Interesting. What was there any? Well, there's always something unique about every startup raising money, but you're coming in a market where there are these enormous search engine players. How did that factor into the process? Was it harder? Was it not a factor? And then how did you kind of get to a term sheet?
So I'll summarize it here. I also wrote up a really long post on this right after I did it. It was like a kind of brain dump, which is on my blog if you have any interest. First thing to note is I was completely new to the fundraising process. My last company had no investors. The company before that was just my friends and family. So I didn't really know any VCs. I had kind of no experience there. I waited long enough where we had enough traction where it was, and I had sold a previous company, even though I had no context there, it was easy to get meetings for me, which is unlike some people. So I cast a wide net, tried to find particular partners that would be useful or I thought would be interested. I literally talked to 40 different VC firms and partners. I had a big whiteboard mapping it all out. These are probably normal rejection rates, but, pretty much everyone said no. I think people didn't really understand how you compete with Google generally. And, but, I got a few people who were interested, ended up with a few term sheets. And so in the end, that's really what you want, because it was kind of a competitive process. Got, obviously USV is a great result. Not sure what else to add.
Yeah, no. Well, we'll follow on. There's a question for Darren. You've raised that money, I guess, going on 4 years ago now. The question was asked to Darren about what's different in your startup pre-VC money and post-VC money. What's your take on that?
I mean, similar to Darren, I probably should have raised it earlier. I mean, the reason why I went out to raise it is I realized for the first couple of years, it was kind of pre-product market fit, and I didn't know what to build. So, I was trying different features, trying to figure out what would work, right? So if I had more money, it wouldn't have helped me at all, like even for hiring, because I didn't even know what they should build. It would just been more overhead, right? So I was building it myself. At the end of 2010, so like a couple years after launching, I had signs of product market fit. So like I could tell because we were getting press and people would actually stick on the site versus completely going back down. What happens when you don't have any product market fit? And at that point, there therefore was a set of things we could build, and I wasn't willing to spend on the hires. And you could make the argument right then I was capitally starving the business and should have raised right then. And so we raised, I don't know, like a year after that, and it takes a while to raise. So I was maybe 6 months too late on that. But that's the big difference. Is there was a whole sorts of things we needed to spend money on, and we could have done that earlier.
Got it. So the way you thought about planning for the next year, or the way you thought about planning for the next 3 years now, probably way different than how you were thinking about things before then.
Well, there's a lot of advice to raise 18 months of funding. I honestly think that is too small. I think people should raise 3 years plus if they can.
Yeah.
Because what that afforded me to do is not think about it at all, and just spend whatever I needed to spend to get things done and not mess around with, if I wanted to hire someone here or there, just hire them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the big advice I took away from it. I originally was thinking, because I was being very frugal, and I was thinking when I first set out to raise money, actually, I was thinking of just raising an angel round of $1 million. And then in the middle of it, I changed to raising more.
Because you could, or what caused the shift in thinking?
Conversations about what I was going to do with the money and how big the opportunity was, and I realized this thing we're talking about right in the middle. Like if I raised $1 million, it would be like I'd be looking over my shoulder and paying attention to this plan. Whereas if I raised $3 million, I just wouldn't care what happened, because we also had a good path to revenue. So I figured after $3 million, if I raised $3 million, we'd be profitable within that amount of time, which we have been.
Yeah.
And so I figured it could be the last raise we needed.
And so far, so true. Nice. Very cool. What's the culture like at DuckDuckGo? I mean, you seem like the type of person who probably yells at your team a lot, and like you probably swear.
Nailed it.
Right? Do I have that right? So what's the scene like there? And you also your team's fairly distributed too, geographically. Is that right?
Yeah. So we have a kind of a unique hiring process. I think it's unique in the sense that we've hired every single person from the DuckDuckGo community, either open source if they're developers, or our 2 non-tech hires. We're hiring a couple more from our forums and stuff like that. Which means because DuckDuckGo is global, they come from literally anywhere. And so I think we're like 25 people around that, and I think we're in 15 countries or something like that. And we also, because they were in the community, we see what they've done, and then we have a part-time process too for like several months sometimes. And as a result, we've had essentially zero turnover.
The part-time process to see if they're going to be a fit long-term for the team, or what's that about?
Both culture fit is generally already done because they are part of the community, but a lot of people they look good on paper, but they don't deliver for various reasons, especially if they're remote. And the part-time thing, the motivation's already high, so they're willing to do it. It's like kind of a mission-driven company in general, and it validates that they would be a good employee, and it's worked. Yeah. But it is a slower. There are downsides to this process. It is slower to fit short-term needs if you have something, because it's the funnel is very winnowing.
Yep. Yep. Makes sense. Cool. So let's shift to the book called Traction. Very relevant today. And I've got some questions that are probably as much just about me personally wanting to know. But please, will it be weird if I stand up now and you stay sitting?
I actually wanted to stand up the entire time.
Should we both stand up?
Yeah.
Okay. So just so I can see all of you guys better. So I've got some questions, but please, when you think of something, whatever, raise your hand. If you've read the book or had questions or curious about anything, raise your hand and ask Gabe, and I will call on you accordingly. So. One opener. So you spent 5 years writing the book. Obviously, you're running a startup during the time of doing that. So you spent 5 years doing it. Can you share something? And I don't want to say like the one most, but like a thing where you're like, I did not think about this at all in the category of traction, and now that I look back on my project, there's this mind-blowing thing that I've learned that or maybe not mind, but just interesting to you through the project.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the two central theses of the book, which I discovered over time for myself. The first is bias. So there are these 19 channels that Darren had up on the screen, and you're biased towards a bunch just based on your experience and your inclinations from talking to people. So my last startup was had a lot of SEO-driven growth. And so I came into DuckDuckGo being inclined and biased towards that growth channel, and immediately started trying to grow DuckDuckGo via SEO, which sounds ridiculous, but it's ranking in Google for the term search engine or new search engine or search. And I was able to do that. Like, I knew what I was doing, and I executed it fine. But the problem with it was it was not the right channel because it topped out pretty quickly. Like the traffic on that is not that great. And had I not done that and focused on the right channel, which at the time, the one after that took us off was content marketing, my blog and some microsites, we would have grown faster earlier. And the barrier towards that was my bias. And I see that over and over again. That's holding people back.
And what's that about? It's like, hey, I know all about SEO, so I can apply what I've learned to any business and get traction, and that's sort of fatal thinking. Is that part of it?
Yeah, and if you think of it, there's actually you made a comment in your opening remarks about why people don't put effort on traction to begin with, and it's actually a similar concept. Is that people who start startups like product, so they work on product, and people like to do what they're good at and what they already know, so they go to SEO if they know SEO. The problem is at a startup is you need traction to succeed, and the traction channel that you might succeed may be one you have no knowledge of, or even worse, you actually is not in your personality, like speaking, or you're actively you've been encouraged that it's bad, like affiliate marketing or something. Unfortunately, that might be the thing for your startup that takes it off. Yeah. So that inclination of not working on traction just because it's not what you like to do, or these channels you feel icky to you, that is what's holding people back in a lot of cases.
Makes sense. As a reader of the book, I don't know, a little bit eye-opening for me, I guess, is, tell me if you agree with this. I mean, you're basically suggesting that you, as a founder, it's as much about learning the muscle of figuring out what is my traction channel that works for my business. And part two to that is, and by the way, it changes over periods of time. So just because it worked now, don't get comfy, So it's sort of the meta skill of learning to find your traction channel as much as it is about learning one. I mean, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, so DuckDuckGo has changed, kind of like Darren's story. We've gone through 6 different channels in each growth phase. And I do believe that in each growth phase, like something's dominating, like you may be using other things like trade shows to fuel something else. But if you look at your numbers, it's generally one thing you can account for is dominating your growth, and you're using other things to funnel into it. And then at some point that saturates. Now for us, like the search market is so big, and if you enter into huge markets, this happens that you only reach so many people through your strategy, and then you saturate and have to move on to something that has bigger scale. But to your point of not focusing on 1,000 to 10,000, I won't dwell too much on that.
No, what's cool about that is that means that as companies get bigger, what used to move the needle for them no longer does, opening the door for us small startups to come in and try that channel, which now might be abandoned or something like that.
I see that now. I mean, we're still tiny in the search market, and the things that we can do, Google and Bing and Yahoo wouldn't do because it wouldn't move the needle for them at all.
It's uninteresting. Yeah, exactly. But for you, yeah, exactly. Cool. Do we have any audience questions? Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, you talked about the part-time process for hiring employees. Can you elaborate on how you evaluate part-time employees now that they're dispersed throughout the world?
It's all output. I mean, we at DuckDuckGo, I mean, this gets more into corporate organization, so I won't go too deep into it unless everyone wants to. But we have we divided all the areas of the company up into very minute areas to try to give people ownership, and we set objectives in them and have oversight, but they basically are empowered to make day decisions. And so someone comes in, we basically give them a project and try to have them run with it, and they either deliver or they don't.
Any other questions so far? Yeah, in the back.
Talking about people being biased against their potentially most successful distribution. How often do you see that? Because thinking with someone that it seems like that's what's happening to them, it's very frustrating when you're telling to try something else.
It's hard to say because so many companies fail, right? And you got to be like, well, why did they fail? And it's often unclear. But I've seen a lot of startups fail over the last few years where the product seemed like it should achieve success. And I attribute that to them not finding the right channel, and I attribute that to either bias or just wasting too much time on not going on traction, or wasting too much time running like a serial process and not running tests in parallel. Whatever they're doing, they wasted too much time.
Yep.
Do you think the channels for traction change depending on the stage?
The question was, do you think the channels change depending on the stage your company's in? One thing we found in researching the book was that every channel was valuable for companies at every different stage and every different consumer versus business. And everyone wanted us to have a table of some kind and was like, tell me the channels that are good for, business startups at the early stage. And you could plot them, and there would be ones that are more likely that people have succeeded under. But the problem with that is the really breakout companies were using like underutilized channels in their space. And that's kind of why they were breakout. Because all the competitors were doing one thing, and they found a way to grow over here where there was no competition and nothing to arbitrage away yet. And so I think what Rick said is true, that it changes over time in your company, but I'm hesitant to suggest any particular channel for any particular type of startup, because I'm always surprised when some company breaks out that they use some new underutilized strategy.
Yes, sir.
Is it okay to try early traction just with a pre-launch webpage where you're just getting collecting emails rather than a minimum viable product? Or what's your take on that?
Yeah, my take is start it right when you start product development. And I liken it, so I like this leaky bucket metaphor, which is in the book. But if you think of it as a leaky bucket, your product is, the bucket, and it's got a lot of holes in it when you first start out. It's like not going to hold water. Maybe holding water is product market fit in this analogy. And people are like, well, I don't want to pour money on the top, customers, because they're just gonna leak out. And that's people's general justification for not doing traction earlier. The problem with that, and so what they do is they get a beta group of customers, and they get feedback from them, and they think they're plugging the holes. And then they launch, and they find out that their beta group is way too close to them. They like you, they're telling you what you want to hear. And you go out and try to sell it or put it in the market, and you all of a sudden find that there's like 5 other holes, and you have to do 2 more rounds of product development to get any traction. If you had done a slow traction process, you don't have to spend all your money on it, but you run some tests, so you have a stream of cold customers coming through right at the beginning. You can figure out exactly what holes to plug, and it is a bit counterintuitive because you're spending less time on product development, but at the beginning, but ultimately you spend less time altogether because you don't do those extra cycles after you launch.
So pre-launch web page is fine, even though it's a leaky bucket, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think all those types of tests, testing little features, are all useful.
Keep following up on that question. Are there any examples that you've got on feedback that you've gotten from customers that were very unexpected, or changes to your business model, or opportunities that you guys pursued that were very unexpected and you recognize kind of based on conversations with customers, please?
Yes, definitely. We get stuff all the time that surprises me, especially in search, because essentially the search space is completely infinite. So people are searching for all sorts of random things I would have never, ever thought about, and they come up with these edge cases. So, for example, like right now, we've been working on making local better. There are a gazillion edge cases in local. Like I typed in this coffee shop, but it's a chain, and I really want all 5 of them and not just the one closest to me. And I could go ad infinitum and all these tiny examples, but I'm always surprised about stuff that we would have never thought of if we weren't talking to actual people all the time. Sorry, the question was, and I'll repeat them from now on. Is there anything that surprises you when talking to customers? Yeah, and the answer is definitely yes.
In your book, you talked about trying all these different traction channels out simultaneously. But again, some traction channels, even if you do a small scale test, take a longer time to get results compared to other ones. So how do you determine which one's a better channel? If if you're testing for 6 months and maybe the other channels will give you a better result in 1 year or something like that.
The question was, you're testing a bunch of channels. Some of them have different time lengths to test. So how do you kind of deal with that? We're actually running this process, identified in the book, right now at DuckDuckGo, because our last channel has kind of topped out, and so we're kind of starting it over. And we have the same exact problem, that some take longer than others. One thing you can do is try to design better tests, so they're smaller and they take less time. I've been continually surprised how, if you think about it longer, you can actually probably test it easier and quicker. But some nevertheless take long, in which case, that is what it is. They take long, and if something else takes off in the interim, you go with it, and then you get the test results back, and if that looks more promising, maybe you change what you're doing.
In trying to acquire repeat business, especially in search, which is so competitive, is there anything that you found brings people back to use your search engine often again, kind of identifying with the brand and whatnot?
So the question, if I understand it right, is there something on the branding side or product side that really gets people coming back as repeat customers? So in search. So in search in particular, the one thing you can do is get people to set it as their default search engine. And that's really when you look at other companies and they're like Twitter says you need to follow 20 people or whatever, that's our version of that, is you need to get you to set it as your default search engine.
So for your college education, did you have strictly a software engineering background? And if so, what habits did you use to enter the company business?
The question is, in college, did I have a software engineering background? And if so, or if not, what made me get more business savvy? So I did not. I was a physics major with a minor in Earth, atmosphere, and planetary sciences.
Naturally.
What I did was I started this company right out of school, and I forced myself to be the front-end engineer on it and the sysadmin. And I was terrible at it to start with, but I hired a bunch of my friends, and I just learned from them. And so as a result, now when we have a lot of software engineering trained professionals, we get into lots of debates about how things should be written or not. And I'm usually probably wrong.
Do they want to rewrite all your code?
Pretty much.
Got it.
Sure. So we talked a little bit about listening to your customers, and I think what Henry Ford or what Steve Jobs would say is that if we listened to our customers, they would have asked for faster horses. Has there been an example of when you thought listening to the customers actually wasn't the right idea, and kind of when you went against what most people were asking you for?
So the question is, like Steve Jobs and Henry Ford have said, if you listen to your customers too much, you can go in the complete wrong direction. Is there a time when that's happened to us? Absolutely. So if you ask our customers, they want us to look exactly like Google. Everyone's coming from Google, and they're like, why don't you look like Google? Pretty much. If you actually look at the other big search engines, that's what they've done. They've looked exactly like Google. And I ultimately don't think that's the way that we win as to differentiate our brand. And so we've completely gone against that. And it takes longer for people then to switch to us, but they're more long-term users once they do.
I had a question. As soon as I can find it, sorry. So we talked a little bit about this, but one of the things you encourage people to do, and I forget if you allude to this in your book, you definitely talk about it in your blog, is to go and talk to founders who failed at what you're trying to do. And it's interesting advice. It's I think it's great advice. Can you talk about why you feel this is important? Do you have any personal anecdotes from you doing that, maybe for the various projects you worked on that you could share, and kind of what made you believe in that so much?
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the easiest, highest ROI things you can do as a startup entrepreneur. And I realized it actually in the process of raising money, because when raising money, I wanted to look at all the search startups and who funded them, and what the deal was with that. And so I ended up just going out and wanting to reach out to all these search startups that failed, and as well as people in big companies like who had worked on AOL search and stuff, and just pick their brain a bit. And I learned more in that brief period of a few weeks about kind of insights into what to do and what not to do than I had in the previous 2 years, essentially, of just doing a random walk myself. And the reason why is exactly that, is that they toiled at something for several years related to what you're doing, tried probably hundreds of experiments that you are probably going to just repeat. Now, some of them may work now and didn't work for them. They may be worth repeating. You have to take everything with a grain of salt. But it's essentially a brainstorming session for you that you really can't get anywhere else, and it's actually easy to do because people are very willing to talk to you.
You're reaching out to strangers. Some of those examples were strangers.
Absolutely strangers. Yeah, this is all.
And
cold.
You're like, hey, dude, you totally failed at your startup. Can you tell me why? How did you word it to make them talk to you?
Yeah, exactly. It was exactly that verbatim.
Really? Shocking.
It was essentially that, though. I said, hey, I'm running DuckDuckGo. It's a search startup. We're getting a little traction. I see that you did X, Y, or Z. I'd love to just talk to you about it and see what I can learn about what you did.
And you got a good response rate. It sounds like people are willing to share.
Pretty much 100%. I don't remember a case where someone said no.
That's awesome. Do we have other questions? I've got one more. Yep, go ahead.
You mentioned that you work with people from all over the world that contribute to DuckDuckGo. For equity compensation, is that variable where they're from, or is it strictly based on the value?
So the question is, you work with people all around the world, is there equity compensation and by extension all compensation, I'm guessing, would that vary across? So for us, it really hasn't. I mean, what we've done, and every startup kind of adopts their own compensation things, but we've had a standard equity grant for new hires, which, I think is pretty generous for the last few years, and we give it the same to everybody, no matter who they are or what position they're taking or what they start. And cash compensation, we've actually done the same. We have just complete bands, and if you're in that role, that's what you get, no matter where in the world you are. And if you happen to live in Thailand, where you become a king because of it, that's up to you. You can move to Thailand if you want.
Cool. I don't see any other questions. So my final request for you to lecture all of us, at the risk of being a little bit redundant, but I think it's so impactful. You say it all over the book and in blogs and other places I've heard you talk, and that is the 50% rule. And can you talk a little bit about it, but just as to close us off here, can you define the 50% rule and urge all of us why you think it is so important?
Yeah, I mean, this is related to the same things we were talking about earlier, about bias. And the problem is when you start a company, you start it because you have a product or service idea, usually, and you want to work on that product or service, and you don't necessarily want to work on the harder, unglorifying traction piece where you're getting rejected a lot and things aren't working and it's just not as fun. But ultimately, you die because you don't have enough traction. It's usually not because you didn't have a product. Like, everyone ends up with a product. And so you really have to, the 50% thing is really just saying, you need to force yourself to do this, and you got to find a way to do it. So 50% is a way to do that. If it's less than 50%, it's already becoming 0%. Because once it's below half, you're already thinking about it as not as important as what you should be doing. Now, I see this all the time, even with people who understand it. I mean, if you look at, I'll ask them to write down everything they're doing, and they have, their product roadmap is way bigger than their traction side roadmap. And that's the natural thing you have to fight against, because you're working on the product, you have a billion product ideas, you're like, I can improve it in this way, or that way. But the reality is, this or that way may not matter. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier with DuckDuckGo is, there are infinite things I could have done feature-wise in search, but they weren't doing anything. Like, I would implement it and it wasn't getting new users, And I think people get in a trick in their head where they rationalize that if I build this feature, that's the feature that's going to work, whereas they really should have been spending that time working on the traction side.
From the man himself, please give a round of applause to Gabe Weinberg. Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this program. For more information on Founder Factory and the Philly Startup Leaders, visit phillystartup.leaders.org. We produce this program in the studios of the Lubetkin Media Companies in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, on the web at beingthemedia.com. For everyone at Philly Startup Leaders and the Lubetkin Media Companies, this is Steve Lubetkin. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you out there on the net. Take good care.